Hello guys, welcome. So hello guys, welcome to Ashutosh coaching channel. Now today we are going to start the chapter name is breathing and the exchange of gases. Breathing क्या होता है? External spiration is the process of exchange of O2 and atmosphere with the produced by the cell is called को बोलते हैं breathing कहते हैं. Respiratory organ क्या होता है? Respiratory organs क्या होता है? Direct respiration by the diffusion of the from the environment and the sponges colontrates and the flatworms etc. The cutaneous or by the skin earthworm and the tracheal system insect and the gills aquatic arthropods mollusca and the lungs in terrestrial forms. Human respiratory system क्या होता है? Each nostrils open in the nasal chamber or through the nasal passages and nasal chamber opens to the nasopharynx and the nasopharynx open to through the glottis and of the larynx in the trachea, and the larynx is a cartilaginous bone which produces sound and hence called the sound box, and the cartilaginous epiglottis cover the glottis during the swallow and to the prevent entry food into the trachea. The trachea is a straight tube extending up through thoracic cavity and which divides into the right and the left primary bronchi at the level of fifth thoracic vertebrae, and each seven. Each bronchus undergo repeated division to form the secondary and the tertiary bronchi, and the bronchioles end up in a very thin thermal bronchioles, and the bronchioles primary secondary and tertiary bronchi and initially bronchi are supported by the cartilaginous ring, and each terminal bronchioles gives to rise to the number of a very thin and irregular walled vascularized and bags like the structure called the alveoli. The branching network of bronchioles and the alveoli comprises the lungs, and there are the two lungs which covered by a double layered and pleura with the pleural fluid in them. Lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber and which is an anatomically and a air tight chamber. Thoracic chamber is formed the dorsally by the vertebral and column, and the ventrally by the septum, okay, sternum, and laterally by the ribs. On the lower side by the abdomen by the dome shaped diagram. Respiration involves the following state: breathing or the pulmonary ventilation by the which atmospheric air is drawn and in CO2 alveolar released out, okay, and diffusion of gas CO2 and O2 across the alveolar membrane and the transported of the transpiratory gases by the blood. Diffusion of O2 and CO2 diffuse between the blood and tissue, and utilization of O2 by the cell catabolic reaction and resultant release of CO2. Mechanism of breathing क्या होता है? Inspiration, it takes the atmospheric air into the lungs and it occurs the pressure the within the lungs and the intrapulmonary pressure and is lower than the atmospheric pressure, and the contraction of the diaphragm and which increase the volume of thoracic chamber anterior posterior axis, and the contraction of external intercostal muscles lift up the ribs and the sternum and causing an increases in the volume of thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. It causes increases in the pulmonary volume and decreases in the intrapulmonary pressure and to less than the atmospheric pressure to force the air outside to the move to the lungs. That is inspiration. Expiration, relaxation of diaphragm and intercostal muscles return to the diaphragm and the sternum to the normal position and reduce thoracic and the pulmonary volume. It increases the intrapulmonary pulmonary pressure highly slightly the above the atmospheric pressure, and it causes the expulsion of air from the lungs, that is expiration, and healthy man breathe 12 to 16 times per minute, okay, and the volume of air involved breathing estimated by the spirometers, okay. Now respiratory volume and the capacities. The tidal volume and the volume of air inspired of or expired during the normal breathing and normal breathing and it is about 500 ml. Inspiration rewards the volume and the additional volume of air, and a person is inspired by the forceful inspiration, and it is about 2500 to 3000 ml. Expiration reserve volume and the additional volume of air, a person expired by a forceful expiration is about 1000 to 1100 ml. And residual volume and the volume of air remaining in the lungs and even after a forceful expiration, and it is about 1200 ml. Inspiration capacity, it includes the tidal volume and respiratory reserve volume. And expiratory system में क्या होता है, it includes the tidal volume and the एक्सपायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम. फंक्शनल रेसिडुअल कैपेसिटी में क्या होता है, इंक्लूड होता है ई आर भी प्लस आर भी. यानी वाइटल कैपेसिटी में क्या होता है, आई आर भी प्लस टी भी प्लस आर भी. एंड टोटल लंग्स में क्या होता है, आर भी प्लस आई आर भी प्लस टी भी प्लस ई आर भी. ओके. रिजर्व वाइटल एंड इंट्रा रिजर्व वाइटल एंड टोटल वाइटल एंड एक्सक्रेटरी रिजर्व वाइटल. ओके. एक्सचेंज ऑफ गैसेज में क्या होता है, alveoli are the primary site of the exchange of respiratory gases, and the exchange of gases also takes place between the blood and tissue. The exchange of O2 and CO2 takes place in the pressure of gradient and by the simple diffusion, and the pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called the partial pressure and represented by the PPO2 for the oxygen and PCO2 for the carbon dioxide. Diffusion of O2 PO2 alveolar air 120 to 104 mHd होता है, PO2 venous is 40 mHd होता है, और O2 diffused from the alveoli to venous bloods. ओके. इसकी बहुत ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है एग्ज़ाम के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से. उसके बाद हमारा डिफ्यूज़न का जान लिया हमने. अब द सॉलिबिलिटी ऑफ CO2 इज़ 20 to 25 times higher than that of O2, and amount of CO2 that it can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference, and the in partial pressure is much higher compared to the O2, and respiratory membrane is formed by the thin squamous epithelium of the alveoli and the endothelium alveolar capillaries and the basement membrane between them. ओके. अब ट्रांसपोर्ट ऑफ गैसेस क्या होता है, ट्रांसपोर्ट ऑफ गैस क्या होता है. ब्लड इज द मीडियम ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्ट ऑफ O2 and CO2, and about 97% of O2 transported by the RBC in the blood, and the 3% of O2 is presented by the plasma in the dissolved state. 20 to 25% CO2 transported in the RBC and in the form of कार्बोनेट कार्ब बोलते नहीं है, कार्बामाइनो and the hemoglobin. And seventh number 70%, fifth number में 70% CO2 carried by the bicarbonate ions in the plasma. 7% CO2 transport in the dissolved state of plasma. ट्रांसपोर्ट ऑफ ऑक्सीजन क्या होता है. हीमोग्लोबिन इज द रेड पिगमेंट एंड प्रेजेंट इन द RBC. O2 bind and the hemoglobin reservedly and from the form oxyglobin, and each oxyhemoglobin can bind and a maximum with 4 O2 molecules, and binding of oxygen and hemoglobin is primary related with the partial pressure of O2, partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ions concentration, pH, and the temperature are factored that the influence, and this bringing, and the sigmoid curve is obtained when the percentage of the saturation and of the hemoglobin and with the O2 plotted against the partial pressure of O2 and the PO2, and the curve is called oxidation curve. The condition favorable of binding of hemoglobin with O2 at the alveolar level, and the high PO2, low H plus ions, and the concentration, low temperature condition favorable for the dissociation of HbO2 and H into the Hb and O2 tissue level. Low PO2 and the high H plus ions concentration and high temperature. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood and blood can deliver around the 5 ml of O2 and tissue under abnormal physiological condition. उसके बाद क्या है, transport of carbon dioxide. 20 to 25% of CO2 carried out in the RBC, binding with the free amino group of hemoglobin formation and the carbamino and hemoglobin. And when PCO2 is high and the PO2 is low, as in the tissue. More binding of CO2 occurs whereas when PCO2 is low and the PO2 is is high, as in the alveoli. Dissociation of CO2 from the carbamino and hemoglobin takes place, and 70% of CO2 transported in the form of HCO3 in the plasma. Okay, and CO2 forms the tissue and diffused into the plasma, and along with the water forms and the carbonic acid, and which dissociated into the HCO3 and negative and plus H plus ion. Reaction is catalyzed and by the enzymes called the carbonic and the anhydrase, and present in the plasma membrane of the RBC in the plasma. Regulation of respiration क्या होता है? Specialized center present in the medulla origin of the brain called the respiratory rhythm and center primary responsible for the regulation of breathing, and the pneumotaxic center of pons and the region of brain has moderate regulation. Neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of the inspiration and the alter rate of respiration. Chemosensitive area adjacent and of to the rhythm center is sensitive to the CO2 H plus ion receptor associated with the aortic arc, and the carotid artery also recognize the changes in the CO2 and H plus concentrated solution and concentration, and the send necessary signals to the rhythm center of the remedial action. उसके बाद हमारा है डिसऑर्डर रेस्पिरेशन, उसमें अस्थमा होता है, ईपीसाइमा होता है। इसमें क्या होता है डिफिकल्टी, अस्थमा में क्या होता है डिफिकल्टी इन द ब्रीदिंग कॉजिंग वेजिंग एंड ड्यू टू द इन्फ्लेमेशन ब्रोंकाई एंड द ब्रोंकियोलस, अ क्रोनिक डिसऑर्डर इन विच alveolar wall are damaged, due to which respiratory surface and decreases it is caused due to the smoking. So guys, this chapter is completely finished. इसका स्क्रीनशॉट ले लिया और इस क्वेश्चन को बना के लाए. ओके इस क्वेश्चन का स्क्रीनशॉट ले ले और इसको बनाकर लाए. So guys, you are a part of journey of NEET. So don't forget it to like, subscribe, and bye bye, and see you in next video.